The one thing I never wanted to do was give maxi vibes on this channel, but here I am comparing a random altcoin to the second most successful crypto ever. That said, the comparison between Bittensor and ETH is quite similar, evidently so much so that it's forced my hand into making this a topic at all. The fundamentals and impact on the space could also be similar depending on how well the Bittensor thesis pans out. The first main hub for decentralized applications, and what could be the first main hub for decentralized AI agents. But as we'll soon see, it's the price action that's playing out a little too similar to ignore, and I've purposely left this topic alone until now to give it time to flesh out. I feel like it's done that, so here we are. I really don't think there's too many out there making videos like this, so perhaps being subscribed is in your best interest. Okay, so here's the ETH chart on the left and TAO on the right. This range down here is the main basis of this entire comparison. Zooming in, it may not seem like much. In fact, it's only now in hindsight we can call it a range. At the time there were massive drawdowns and huge upswings. But this now range and accumulation zone is representative of how ETH and TAO started off at a similar spot. There's no blockchain that will ever replicate the fairness and launch like a BTC. With ETH it had an ICO and tons of people got in at dirt cheap prices. With TAO, although described as fair, there's a lot of caveats with early mining and such. It's not that I'm saying ETH was fair, but it wasn't overly inflated. This cycle, the largest culprit behind slow price action has been atrocious initial valuations. We've now had another launch with Eigenlayer. Great tech, but realistically, why does there even need to be an Eigen token? Furthermore, launching at a 7 billion FDV, there's no investing mechanisms behind it, no game theory, it's all predatory cash grabs. With TAO, it may be the only news cycle crypto not bound by these token economics. Hence it could be the only news cycle crypto where drawing a fractal like this is even somewhat realistic. You'll see exact movements and percentages in a second. On paper something like a SUI could obviously pan out this way too, but early spoilers are that if it were to, it'd put SUI at $9 per coin. That would be a 25 billion market cap, which most definitely makes sense for around endgame. But for ETH that was just the beginning, and it went on to do this after. The point I'm trying to make is these new crypto have such high initial valuations that it's hard to draw comparisons to what came before. TAO is not perfect either, but it's one of the few news cycle crypto where it's still somewhat relative, and with how synonymous its price action has been to early ETH, it's making me pay even closer attention. Okay, let's actually get into this comparison. So starting with the range down here, both ETH and TAO went down as much as 70 to 80% to the downside, and ran more than 200% to the upside. ETH spent about 22 weeks ranging before breaking out, and as for TAO, it's a little bit difficult to point out the exact time down here, as originally the project was set to be a parachain called Fini, but it then launched its own chain in March 2023 called Nakamoto. It traded a good amount prior to this, but for the sake of this video we'll start looking at the data from that March onward, where it took about 30 odd bars before the upside move. We'll call this zone 1, and in my opinion the two are fairly similar. There's nothing too spectacular going on, and this area within itself cannot be the source of comparison between the two, but with how it adds on to what we're about to see, I think they're sufficiently alike. Then comes the first strong break of the range. TAO had 8 weeks of nothing but green candles and ETH 9. The first significant difference between the two is how much they ran. ETH shot up 1700% and TAO 770%. They then put in a temporary top and corrected a similar amount, around 50%, which is typical in smaller caps following strong trending moves. The time it took for these drawdowns was also around the same at 4 to 5 weeks. You then get part 2 or continuation of the original move upward, somewhat close in how hard they ran, with TAO falling short of 300% and ETH getting a little over 200. Yet again the time frame is also pretty much the same, with TAO taking 8 weeks and ETH 9. We'll call this all zone 2. Cool to see, but nothing too special, and at this point I wouldn't say the two are synced up, but is where I would start taking notice. Next up we got the prolonged distribution downward, where all the whales who got in early with ETH and TAO start dumping significant quantities, making off with a whole lot of zeros. ETH from top to bottom went down 72.5%. It took a long 25 weeks to put in this low. TAO went down 77%, so most certainly in the same ballpark as ETH. and the amount of time it took is also right there at 21 weeks. We'll call this Zone 3, and just like the first two zones, yet again it's not the exact same thing, but when we consider how all three zones are showing the same patterns, the comparison of the whole thing between the two starts displaying a pretty similar picture in my opinion. How things sync up on the x-axis with the amount of weeks it took for each move is probably where I'm placing the most significance. But it's the discrepancy in percentages with the initial pump that's the biggest outlier in all of this. I started asking myself that surely there has to be a way to adjust for this. This wick on ETH to the upside I felt was skewing data. I began trying different things and then remembered that TAO also has quite the wick courtesy of old boy CZ, where it wicked up to 1250 the day Binance listed it. Whereas with every other chart that wick pretty much was on par to the prior all-time high of around 760. There's no chart with all the old TAO data plus the Binance wick. But if I just use this arrow here to represent the wick on this MEXC chart, it would look something like this. Hopefully you could imagine that price action. If I now go back to the ETH chart and combine all of Zone 2 into one coherent pump, ETH went up 2,450% and took 23 weeks to do so. Going back to TAO, if we do the same thing and this time consider that huge wick that ETH also had, then what we'll notice is it's extremely similar, where TAO went up 2,650% in 27 weeks. Of course, this would also mean that the drawdown now becomes a bit more different, with TAO going down 87% versus that 73% of ETH. So it's not foolproof with changing things around, there's still core differences. But like I said, in the grand scheme of things, they've clearly showed enough parallels for me to even make this a topic of a video. And I also mentioned that I delayed this video for a while. A part of that was to let more data develop, but also now because we could be getting into the fun part of things. Because the time component has been so close between the two, I'd advise to pay more attention to that versus the percentages. After ETH corrected in Zone 3, it took 13 weeks to break the previous high. If this is the confirmed bottom of TAO before the much anticipated big move up, we're currently printing week 8. 13 weeks from that bottom would be the 4th of November, so almost a month from now. I believe that's more than fair, considering how much TAO has already climbed off its low, and this idea of a bullish October and fourth quarter. I think there's absolutely no excuse for TAO not to break highs by that date if it is in fact playing along with this ETH fractal. And to the TAO community, all this similarity in price action is kind of cute, but it's the next part where it really matters. Otherwise, in hindsight, who even really cares about this? But ETH obviously didn't just stop there. It had a small pause, but for the most part kept printing green candles upward until putting in its local top here. From that bottom in Zone 3, that's 27 weeks before this significant top. 27 weeks from this TAO local bottom is the 10th of February next year. Again, in terms of timing, I think that makes a lot of sense and follows the idea of perhaps getting a market top earlier than we usually do. Seasonality-wise, it could also check out. It was this year the week of February 12th where TAO stopped printing consecutive green candles. The ultimate top came in a month after in March, but it was here where that momentum really stopped. And since so many are probably asking, I'll show the percentages for the sake of it, but please don't hedge your entire investing thesis based on this. But in this 27 weeks, ETH went up 6,700%, and I kind of don't even want to say it, but 6,700% may or may not be that $10,000 plus TAO. Perhaps also reflecting a $100 billion market cap. Now, ETH does go on to make another huge blow-off top after that, but for the sake of my sanity and yours, we'll leave this area alone, calling it the Forbidden Zone. But going back to my original idea that I first stated in this video, the most important thing of all is the valuations are compatible. ETH here topped at a $1.4 billion market cap. TAO got a little over 3 times as much at $4.6 billion. But if I were to do this fractal for any other news cycle crypto, in a way ETH here barely even got started. And for that news cycle crypto, it would be a $20 billion plus valuation. The practicality to compare the two and what comes after is what I think throws it out the window. I'll leave it there for now. Do me a favor and take none of this too seriously. The main message is mark the dates and see for yourself if any of this pans out. Sort of a side quest, but not the primary goal. Leave a like and comment if you enjoyed. Sign up to those exchange links for all your trading and investing needs. And I should be back again, but no promises.